Hi, good morning. So everybody, how are the keynotes? By which I don't mean you have to tell me how awesome I was. Okay. So this is really exciting because I see a room full of people. And in the back of my mind, we started the security track officially in New York a couple weeks ago. And that one was pretty full too, because when I started doing this in the back of my mind, I was like, oh God, are people really going to show up? But thankfully, we had amazing submissions, and I think we have a really great set of talks for the whole day today. So we're going to kick this off with a power duo. You may have already seen Guy on stage, and he is joined by Rachel Alon Simpson, and they are going to be talking about security ergonomics. Do your users know more about security than you do? So please help me welcome Rachel and Guy.
All right. So Guy and I wanted to talk a little bit about the tension between security and usability. So I'm just going to dive right in. So everyone in here in the room is probably either a developer, maybe a front-end developer, or back-end, or maybe I don't know if there are any UX designers or product managers in the room, perhaps. But what we all have in common is that we make products. We make things that people use. And because of that, we've become the de facto gatekeepers to these digital and online spaces. So we're responsible for the security of spaces that are becoming increasingly mainstream, like government or healthcare services. And because many of us touch directly the user experience, we also know that security can be complex. As we develop our products, we want to think that our users are on our side, so we give them options. But unfortunately, users don't really think about security. They just want to get something done. That might be posting a tweet to Twitter, or it might be making a bank accounts transfer. But ultimately, while security might be important to them, it tends to be back of mind. So we think about attacks on security, and we think of them this way. We imagine sophisticated attacks, but in reality, a lot of those attacks tend to be more simple. It might be someone looking over someone else's shoulder as they type their PIN number into a bank machine, or someone who seems that they're in a position of authority asking someone else for their password. So these are pretty simple attacks, but they tend to be very effective. So many of us in this room are probably asking ourselves, are our users stupid? Why do these kinds of things work? And it might make us feel better to think of it this way, but in reality, users are behaving in ways that match their own goals and motivations. There is a certain logic to it. And we have to keep in mind that security might not be important to our users while it's important to us, and we have to be aware of that in any given moment.
So hi, I am Guy. You've seen me yesterday on stage. I've been working on security for a good couple of decades now, with an interim there where I worked on performance, most recently being the CTO at Akamai. And now, as you've seen yesterday, I'm the founder of a company called Snyk doing security developer tools.
My name is Rachel. I'm a user experience designer, which means I design the thing that falls between the person and the piece of code that does something for them. At the moment, I'm working on the Chrome UX team because I care a lot about making things that are really important a lot easier and more enjoyable to use. In my free time, I organize a lot of design events like the Munich UX Design Jam, and I also sometimes mentor startups at the Google Startup Launchpad.
Cool. So the first topic we're going to talk about is, so at a high level, what we're going to talk about through this presentation is why do users make insecure decisions? And we'll talk about how can we help them not make such insecure decisions. We're going to cover three topics here, which are HTTPS and certificate errors, phishing, and authentication. For each one of those, we're going to try to give some practical real-world data, some practical tips and tricks, but maybe even more important, try to extrapolate from them some design principles, systems, and visual design that you can take with you to apply to a broader set of decisions.
Okay, so this is the big question. Why is it that people do what they do? Why do users make decisions that we would consider to be insecure? And there are three top reasons that we want to talk about more in depth today. And obviously, these aren't the only reasons that people behave the way that they do, but they're a good way to start thinking about how our users think and work. So first and foremost, users have different motivations. They're most likely to be focused on their own tasks, so they tend to filter security data that might give them indications of attacks or other important details. So this whole topic is primarily about attention and focus. Secondly, lack of expertise. We don't want to say that users are stupid. What we want to say is that expertise falls on a spectrum. So even a particularly savvy user might miss details outside of their area of expertise and fall victim to an attack. And so even then, there are basic limits to, there are basic human limitations that everyone is subject to. These are things like memory and cognitive load that we have to keep in mind.
Cool. So now the first topic we'll cover is HTTPS indicators. So we see this all the time during our kind of day-to-day lives. We browse the website. If it's an HTTP website, we get a useful indicator that says this is a web page. If it's an HTTPS website, we get a nice little green. We get a log. If it's a super-duper HTTPS website with an extended validation cert, we might get a green bar and the name of the corporation. On the flip side, if the HTTPS was not so great, we're going to get some little warning sign. Maybe it's yellow, maybe it's red. In some extreme cases, actually get a prompt or sort of a blocker. So I have an exercise for all of you. Spot the security information on this page.
It looks super tiny.
So I've given you a little bit of a hint because I was talking about address bars. It's like over here at the top left, there's that tiny little yellow rectangle. It's kind of hard to notice. And this is kind of the first example that we have talking about human limitations. Users are only human. They have a ton on this page. There's a lot of information, each of it designed to draw their attention. And as a person, you can only notice, as a human being, you can only notice so much. But let's roll with it. Let's say that you are one of those rare beings that did notice it, and you clicked it, and you switched to the other tab, and you read it. And now you know that this yellow sign is because this site is signed using a deprecated signature algorithm based on SHA-1. Awesome. So most users don't understand a single word in this sentence.
My manager is really happy right now.
Yeah, and even if you do understand those, it's not clear what are you supposed to do about this, right? So again, it's sort of an example of lack of expertise. I mean, users don't understand security; they don't understand those components, and even more so, how do you weigh this decision? If it wasn't clear to you, the expert creator of this, what is right or wrong here, how can it be clear to my grandmother or like to some non-technical, or even technical but not top security expert user? So the challenges with security indicators go further. For instance, an HTTP website would get the page icon. An HTTPS website using a less ideal crypto would get this warning sign. Is it really right to mark to the user that this HTTPS site is worse than the HTTP website? You might say that systematically there's a logic here. The log didn't appear on the HTTP website, but users are notoriously bad at identifying the lack of something. So the fact there wasn't a log and there wasn't a warning sign there is not a very useful piece of information to them. It just wasn't there, so they didn't see it. Going to the other indicator, if we have a positive indicator, users might over-evaluate it. We see very major breaches and security problems, for instance, the recent Ashley Madison breach, of websites that are very good in terms of their HTTPS usage. And the fact is that HTTPS and TLS is very, very good at protecting a specific subset of security problems. But the fact that a website uses HTTPS does not make the entire system secure. Once again, this knowledge or this sort of distinction is lost on users, right? They browse this site, the browser, which they trust, told them that this site is secure. So they now think it's secure. It's secure to provide information through this site. So it's oftentimes misleading. In reality, what we should say is that we cannot say that because it's HTTPS, it's secure. It's just not true. But what we can say with pretty good certainty is that if it's using HTTP, it's not secure. It means that in this specific channel, data may be leaked, compromised, or faked. So browsers are cluing into this, and the indicators are changing. In the latest Chrome, you would already note that that little yellow rectangle we talked about actually doesn't show up if you open this right now on this site. And this is in part because Indeed talk about which website is better, but also in preparation for this, which is both Chrome and Firefox have stated that over the next while, there's no clear timelines, they're going to start making HTTP website as dubious security and later on straight up as insecure. So this is a more accurate distinction. It's more user-oriented about how do you want the user to act. And these are screenshots from Chrome, but we're seeing in Firefox nightly, we're seeing some starting indicators of this. Clearly, browsers know that this is an evolution. They don't want to mark the entire web as insecure to desensitize users. However, they are kind of going through this path.
Okay. So guys explained why users might not notice a security indicator, or why they might not even understand the security indicator if they notice it. So I'm going to move on to talk about why the user might not care. So this is a really good example. This is an SSL warning that was in Chrome 36. And it's pretty clear that this is not a subtle warning. This is a very direct and bold warning saying that this is not a secure site.
Hard to miss this one.
It's hard to miss. But unfortunately, only about 37% of users paid attention to this warning. In fact, the other 63% of users clicked directly through without heeding our warning. This is a great example of different motivations. So users are very focused on completing a task. They want to go to their website and post that urgent tweet. And when this barrier between them and the thing they want to do appears, they might not pay that much attention to it. So having noticed that Firefox had better stats for their SSL warnings, the team decided they wanted to do a redesign of the SSL interstitial. So the new design, which you see here, it uses strong visual cues to voice an opinion about the situation. So there's a big blue button that says "Go back to safety," communicating to the user what we think they should do in this situation. Indeed, if you wish to proceed through the error, you can see that there's a almost difficult to perceive link here at the bottom. This makes it really difficult for the user to go through, but if they want to do it, it can be found. So this redesign dramatically improved the adherence to the warning. So now about 62% of people paid attention. Obviously, this is a big improvement. We don't think it's perhaps enough, but it really has made a big difference in terms of users understanding what they need to do here.
So this is a good example of what's called opinionated design. Oftentimes when you design, you have an opinion about what should be done, and in security, even more so than otherwise. You should sort of have an idea of what do you want the user to do, what's the recommended course of action, and those should come into play in the design that you have. For instance, in this case, we've seen the default action being back to safety versus the default action being proceed. The indicators we talked about before are also opinionated design. They're voicing an opinion about what is or isn't secure, but they're a little softer because they're just an indicator in the background. On the flip side, HSTS is an example of a systems design decision that is firmly opinionated. This is an example where the website can communicate. If I browse an HTTPS website over HTTPS once, it can return a header to me that says, this website should always be browsed over HTTPS. And this is now an instruction to the browser. If a user tries to browse this site over HTTP because they made a mistake or because they were fooled by an attacker, the browser would not let them through. Period. There is no, if you kind of dug through the text here, if you could see it, there is no option to get through that. So this is a firm opinion of it, and it's very much a system design at this point versus visual design. So kind of moving out maybe of specifically HTTPS and certificate errors, opinionated design with regards to security especially is something you should apply every time you have a decision that has some sort of security effect. Figure out what you want the user to do and try to guide them through it through design. All
right. So our next topic is the exciting world of phishing. And I'm really excited to talk about this idea. So many of you here have probably received probably an email, but maybe also a letter that looks like this one. It's got a name, it's actually called a 419 scam, and it dates back to the 18th century. So this is the classic Nigerian prince email. How it works is someone claims to be from a royal family or a big company or some other source of status or credibility, and they want to transfer money somewhere and they need your help. So they're going to need, of course, the bank account details and your name and all of that information so that they can make that transfer. And then, of course, they'll give you a great reward for your help with that. Okay, so these are some excerpts from that example. I'm going to just read it out. So it says here, I seize this opportunity to extend my unalloyed compliments of the new season to you and your family, hoping that this year will bring more joy, happiness, and prosperity into your household. Here, I'm therefore seeking for a reliable person that will play the human role as the next of kin to this fund, which is in the amount of £32 million sterling. Yeah. And please respond immediately via my private email address, j_jerrysmith@aol.com.
I always get unalloyed compliments.
I get
those all the time.
We accept unalloyed compliments.
Yeah.
Yes.
Especially after this talk.
Yes. Okay, so many of you are probably thinking about this phrase, there's no patch for human stupidity. Now, so it seems funny, but a lot of people are fooled by this kind of thing. It's good. No. A lot of people are fooled. So there is a security company called ThreatSim, which conducted a study, a State of the Fish report in 2014. And they found that 23% of people, on average, open the email, or an email like this one, and 11% on average click through. So the slide says lack of expertise, but in reality what we're talking about here is a blind spot. If you haven't seen it, you might not be aware of what you should be looking for if you haven't heard of this type of thing before. So you combine that lack of awareness with this sort of chance to be a hero and a handsome reward, and it's not any wonder why people fall for it. So if you remember this slide, people generally don't perceive the absence of a warning sign. If they're not looking out for something, if they're not aware that something could happen, and they aren't sort of repeatedly looking for it in any given moment, they're very likely to miss it. In this case, the user is expected to notice a lack of indicators of credibility, things like credible language or visual design or credible logos. Okay, so we tell you this, but we want you to really understand how difficult it is for a user to actually see this kind of thing when they're not looking for it. So we've got a nice example to show you. Oh, wait. I'm going to just... I have a hack. Okay. This is the monkey business illusion. Oh, before we start, can I just get a show of hands? How many people have seen this before? Okay. Don't ruin it.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half miss the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion. Learn more about this illusion and the original gorilla experiment at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
Just let them...
The monkey business illusion.
No, suffering. Okay, there we go. All right.
Just play.
There we go. Okay, so I guess this just really effectively makes the point about how difficult it is to notice something you're not aware of. I just want to see a show of hands. If you haven't seen this before, can I see who missed the gorilla? Pretty savvy.
Yeah, I missed the gorilla when I watched it.
Yeah.
I counted right, though.
Okay, so as you mentioned here, about half of normal users miss the gorilla. And so similarly, people who are going about their regular day-to-day business might miss security notifications or details.
Right, because they're focusing on those rewards.
Yeah.
So kind of take a step back and talk about those indicators that we have, right? How were you supposed to identify these, right? These were like visual cues, spelling mistakes, plausibility of the story, who was it sent from. But these are all things that can be done better. You don't have to send this type of funky email. A sophisticated attacker can send a sophisticated ploy here that can fool even savvy users. Usually this technique is referred to as spear phishing, as if phishing is broad and spear phishing is targeting a specific audience. Let's look at a couple of examples of that. So a couple of years ago, the Syrian Electronic Army attacked multiple media websites. One of those media websites was the Financial Times, and they got an email like this. It's kind of hard to see, but this is an HTML link on it, and it looks like it's going to CNN, but in fact it's going to a malicious website. And that website is identical, sort of bit for bit, except for the URL, to the Financial Times corporate single sign-on page. So this is a fairly simple page still, but that with that corporate page, it's fairly well done. And then some people fell for it, and they clicked the link, they provided the password. Some didn't, and they reported it to the IT department. And the IT department went on and sent an email like this that says, hey, we've got this phishing ploy, you really should be changing your password. Now, the attackers at this point have compromised some of the inboxes. So they then very quickly took this page and resent the same email to everybody, but this time swapping these HTML links there to their malicious website. So now, at this point, users, they're actually even more savvy than that. They even avoided sending those to the technology department. So they sent it to the people in the organization that they thought would be least savvy. So now you're getting an email that is identical to the email that your IT department just sent. It's being sent from a genuine FT email address, and it's motivating you to sort of take action in a very immediate fashion. It comes from this sort of figure of authority. So, and of course, if you click that link, you again got to that sort of corporate website or kind of single sign-on page. So really, at that point, your only sort of chance of success is the URL. But if you open this on a mobile phone, which many people have, then suddenly that URL is truncated. And if you didn't literally go into the address, you couldn't spot that this is a different site. So this is a much more sophisticated attack. Some more savvy users fell for it, specifically Andrew Betts, who might be here in the audience over here, who is a very security savvy person, director at FT Labs, fell for this, and he wrote more about his experience at the link down here, which we'll post later on. So clearly, attacks are going to be more sophisticated. In this case, just to talk a little bit about repercussions, the attack that they did was not just against the FT. In the case of the FT, the damage was fairly light. It was just a couple of bad blog posts from this here in Electronic Army. But this ploy was done across multiple media websites, and some were not kind of treated as lightly. Specifically, in the Associated Press, they tweeted a fake post that says that there were 2 explosions in the White House and that Obama was injured, which resulted in a substantial drop in the Dow Jones index for a brief period of time until it was kind of spoofed, or it's kind of deemed to be a spoof. So some very real financial implications, both globally and personally to organizations. It also hurt the AP brand. So this is kind of coming back to human limitations, right? Even if you are a top security expert, there's only so many details you can pay attention to. We're still humans. It's only there. It also is an example of different motivations, right? When people got that email from their IT department, they were motivated by fear, right? They didn't want their accounts compromised, and as a result, the attackers played on that and got exactly that. They're also influenced by the fact the email came from a figure of authority, their IT department. They trust those. They do those blindly from IT, from legal, from other entities. And these notions of fear, rewards, figures of authority, all of those come into play a lot when you talk about phishing scams. The second example I want to show of phishing involves me. So I also consider myself a security-savvy customer. As I've said, I found a company called Snyk, and
just 10 years background in
security. A tiny bit of security I do, I found a Snyk now, and I did what many people do, which is I filed a trademark for the word Snyk, so I can use it as a part of my company name. So I filed it, and a couple of weeks later, I get in the mail this letter. This is sort of a physical letter that I got in the mail that prompts me to pay some fees associated with that trademark. And the letter seemed legit. It was exactly the type of letter I expected to pay. The amount there, which is 1,000-ish euros, is along the lines of how much it costs. It looks very official. I totally fell for it. I was ready to pay. The only thing that saved me is that I was actually filing this trademark through lawyers, and I thought that they were handling the payments. So I sent them a note to say, hey, is this, am I supposed to pay this, or did you already pay it? And they emailed me back, says, no, it's a fraud. Don't do it. And I've actually subsequently received 3 more letters of sort of similar caliber. But it's, first of all, it's again another example of more kind of well-crafted attack, fraud attack. It also shows how phishing and fraud can actually happen not only kind of outside your digital system, but outside the digital world at all, right? Like this completely came to me through the mail. Your systems are often not at all engaged in a phishing exploit going on. So phishing is hard. Phishing is, maybe the hardest problem right now in security in the sense that there's no real kind of good single solution because it happens outside your systems. You need to have a multifaceted sort of strategy to how do you deal with it. You need to educate your users. You need to have good email filter blockers. You need to have good kind of blacklists. You need to monitor the use of your brand across the web. So there's a lot that you need to do as a corporate security group. Specifically from a design perspective, what you can try to do is help users do sort of what we just said they're pretty bad at, which is notice the absence of something. Not at all a perfect solution. This was implemented by Bank of America, for instance, up until a while ago, which is every time you logged in, you had to choose previously when you registered an image that would show up that was personalized to you, so the attackers wouldn't know what it was, and that would show every time you log in, and you had to confirm that this is indeed the image that you've seen. So this is a big image, it's a big and noticeable step, and they're trying to sort of habituate this process, right? Help the user really, really get used to seeing this, so when it's not there, they're not going to proceed. Now, stats show that still motivations trump this, and users still click through this, but some users don't. So it's another piece of the puzzle you can consider when you design your system. Have a personalized phrase, visual that's bold enough to notice, to help your users identify they're being attacked. So, trying to sort of step out of phishing, I think what we can take from phishing is the fact that users and systems and attackers don't play by the rules, right? We want them to go through our systems, we want them to apply some actions, we want them to follow the instructions we give them in the policies, but they oftentimes do not. And the question is, what do you do then? And I think in this case we can take a concept from the world of physical security. There's a really nice concept there that I like called fail-safe versus fail-secure. Imagine a door with a digital lock, like an RFID token. You have this door, and now there's a power outage. What do you do with the door? If you keep it unlocked, it's safer, right? In the case of a fire, in case of some, attack going on, people can get through the door, they can get in, they can get out. However, if you left it unlocked, it's also insecure, because somebody can now walk in, and they can steal information, they can steal content, they can leave something inside. You want to be both safe and secure, but you can't. This door is either locked or it is unlocked. It's binary. So you need to ask yourself in every situation, and it may be that in an office building you would choose to keep it unlocked, but in a nuclear reactor you would keep it locked. So a good example of this, maybe in the sort of closer to our world, is credit cards and banks. Credit cards tend to fail safe more for smaller transactions. If they cannot verify them, they oftentimes still allow them because they think that that's value, they'll catch it in retrospect. While banks tend to be fail secure. So if you don't give them all the information ahead of time, usually they won't let you do any action in there. So for you, the action I'd suggest is when you think about these environments and you think about something happening outside of your rules, figure out what do you want to do. Do you want to fail safe and allow it through because the damages are not as high, or do you want to fail secure and sort of not let it through?
Okay. So our last set of examples fall into the topic of authentication, and specifically thinking about passwords. So the big question here that we ask ourselves is, why are passwords so hard for users? We know that passwords are a major issue. A lot of users have difficulty using them, but it's hard to imagine why that might be. So I've broken it down. Okay, so a password system, an authentication system for any product or, I guess, feature, is made up of two pieces of information, your username and your password. This is on a per system basis. So if in a perfect world, users are going to remember a different username and a different password per system. So that's already starting to become a fair bit of information for users to keep track of. In addition, most systems have their own policies in place to ensure that the passwords are strong. Unfortunately, these tend to be inconsistent across different systems, so a user might have to also keep in mind what kind of policies are in place so they can remember which password they used with which username and which system. Then, on top of that, most systems require that users change their password on a regular basis in order to ensure their security. So at this point, you can kind of see why users might start having challenges using passwords. This is a perfect example of human limitations. The demand that we're placing on the user's memory is simply too high. Memory itself is a limited resource, and people remember less over time. So if they're using their password infrequently, they're less likely to remember it. Then, in addition, people are more likely to remember something meaningful than something random, which is exactly the way that we've asked them to create their passwords. Random strings of letters and numbers that no real human could actually ever remember. Okay, so what happens? So users eventually give up. We've placed too much load on their memory, and they say, I can't handle it anymore. They write things down, and they engage in non-secure practices, like using the same password across all systems in order to make sure that they will remember it. Okay, so what can we do? One suggestion, one alternative that has been suggested is password managers, which are a decent solution. But there are two drawbacks. So the first is that you've placed your eggs all in one basket, which lends itself to its own security concerns. And then on top of that, you as a product owner or feature owner can't control whether your users are going to use a password manager. So it's great to suggest it, but you can't expect that it will be there.
So beyond that, it's also kind of hard for us humans, puny humans, to understand what is a hard password. It's not the same as a hard to remember password. If you have a policy that requires an uppercase letter and a lowercase letter, it's probably going to be the first letter that is uppercase. If you ask for a digit or if you ask for a special symbol, it's probably going to be a digit or a symbol that either resembles a character visually or that is appended to the end of the sign. It's very consistent, and users do this so they can remember the password, but that also makes it predictable for attackers to guess. It's hard to know whether a password is easily or not enumerable, how enumerable it is. In addition, not only does the same user use the same password across different systems, different users often use the same passwords. In fact, the top 25 passwords make up 2% of all passwords in the world. And they're not very sophisticated passwords. They're fairly simple. So attackers have actually embraced that, and if they just want to get into a system, they'd often enumerate usernames instead of enumerating passwords. This evades most lockout mechanisms and has pretty good statistics. It's hard to maybe compromise a specific account, but if you're just trying to get through the door, say, into a corporation, they have a pretty good shot of success.
This reminds me, I was just in India, and we ran into really a lot of people. They were sharing accounts, but also they use their wife's name or their husband's name because they'll remember that.
Of course.
Yes.
Yeah. And then tack onto that the fact that probably many of those wives or husbands have the same name.
Yes.
So, on top of all of that, even if you got the user to use a sophisticated password, the reality is it's too much to remember a sophisticated password for every account, so users reuse passwords. So even if your system is super secure and required a truly secure, you built some enumeration tester and you got your user to put some fancy password in there, users do reuse the passwords. And then if one of those other systems where the reuse that password has been compromised, they can now go in and log into your system. And it is, while wasn't an action that was done by your misdeed, it is still a part of your responsibility to help protect those users from that. So the solution for this is two-factor authentication, or the best solution for this is two-factor authentication. Two factors implies that it is 2 out of the 3 factors that can identify you today, the more kind of well-known. 1 is something you know that is hard to guess, like a password. 2 is something you are that is hard to spoof, like a fingerprint or a retina scan. And 3 is something you have, that you have, like a cell phone, so you can get a text message. That's hard to spoof or to sort of get. Biometrics, that's something you are probably the best in terms of identity, but they don't quite scale yet on the web. Maybe there's some work being done on that. So for now, usually when you talk about two-factor authentication, you're talking about a token, something that you have, as well as something that you know. So a password and a token. And it's worth clarifying that tokens are not more secure than password. They're just insecure in different fashion. Right? If you get a text message to log in, then somebody that's near you is probably going to see that text message on your phone, and they can log into your account pretty easily. But somebody that's remote might have a harder time getting into your account. So it's just a different type of profile. But when you combine the two, you get pretty good security. So two-factor authentication, implementing that as a system used to be pretty hard because they had to figure out, that was actually part of this, of various organizations that were trying to give out, banks were trying to give out these calculators. I've got this little HSBC calculator that I was sent. They're expensive, they're cumbersome, people need to carry that thing around with them. So it was very non-usable. Today it's easier because everybody's carrying around a phone, and those phones have applications like Google Authenticator or Authy or others that you can use, or you can get a text message that's also very popular. So today it's much easier, and you really should be using those in your systems. If you really don't want to put that effort, the other alternative you have these days is you can defer the login mechanism to one of those central systems that have the federated logins, like Facebook login or Google or LinkedIn or Twitter. Like all of them have those. And by delegating those, they do their security and in general their authentication and their two-factor authentication fairly well. So it's a valid means of ensuring that those are more secure. While easier, two-factor authentication is still kind of new for many users. Even in the tech industry and definitely outside of sort of the less techy users, it's still considered new and kind of cumbersome, and they can't get it. So I wouldn't recommend requiring it for all systems. Clearly, that's better for security, but it might not be a great usability trade-off. But definitely, I would suggest that you support it, that you promote it. I like GitHub's sort of shaming dashboard. In the team, you have this sort of clear, noticeable components to say who is not running two-factor authentication to make it unmissable, some peer pressure going on.
Highly effective.
Yeah. So definitely encourage it. And at some point, when you look at your statistics, maybe you can switch to requiring it.
Mm-hmm. OK. So speaking of two-factor authentication, so the more complex the system is, the more difficult it is for a user. So we often put in place mitigating factors so that we can kind of balance out that tension between security and usability. Some good examples are things like remembering your password on a computer, or forgot my password system, allowing users to answer security questions or do something else in order to get that password back. But the only thing that we want you, the thing we want you to keep in mind is that your security will only ever be as strong as the weakest link of these seen here. So kind of thinking as a whole, not just about authentication, but in general with regards to designing products, it's important to keep in mind that when you design a product or a feature, remember that security forgiveness falls on a spectrum. So there's not, again, as with our other examples, there's no perfect answer, but there's value in asking the question. You need to decide where you fall on the spectrum between security and usability.
Cool. So for content, that's basically it for us. We gave some specific examples and tips that hopefully are useful on the specific phishing, HTTPS, and authentication environments. But really, maybe our key takeaway is about trying to understand why do our users make insecure decisions, and what design principles can you apply to try and prevent those. So just to recap why users make such insecure decisions. First of all, motivations. They're motivated by fear, by rewards, by authority figures, different motivations. And they're also doing something else, right? If I'm logging into Facebook, I want to see baby pictures. And if you get in my way, I will do whatever I need to do to circumvent those to see baby pictures. The second is lack of expertise. You might understand the implications of making a certain decision, but users probably don't. They might not have considered an alternate path, so they don't have that expertise. Giving them security information and assuming that they could interpret that and make a decision based on that is probably not going to end well. And then last but not least, in most systems, users are only human. And those, as humans, we have limitations. We can only remember so much. We can only notice so much. And that's further reduced by those other motivations, where we have different motivations and we have some lack of expertise. So do not assume that users have fully absorbed or noticed even a security indicator or information that you provided them.
So what do we want you to do about it? We'll just recap. So first of all, know whether your products or features feel safe or feel secure. You need to remember to ask yourself that question, and you need to know what you're going to do when in doubt. Second, practice opinionated design. So design products that clearly communicate a recommended course of action. And remember that the default action is the one that should always keep your users secure. And lastly, when you're designing a product or a system, remember that designing forgiveness into the system, you need to choose where you fall on the spectrum between usable and secure.
Yeah, I think that's it for now. I think we have a couple more minutes. Thank you. And I think we have a couple of minutes still for questions.
Yeah.
So how did they find out you had it? Was there like a database of applications for patent names? Like how the hell did these people know?
How do they find out about the trademark component? Well, they've just sort of seen it before, right? So if you did look at that letter in detail, you'd see that I filed the trademark in the UK, and this was a European system. So this is, it's oftentimes you would file in Europe, but this went to some bank in Czechoslovakia.
I think she's asking also, how did the attackers identify that you were?
Oh, this is trademark is public information.
Yeah, well, that's what I figured.
Sorry, trademark. Yeah, the fact that I filed it was public because it's a trademark, and people are supposed to be allowed to scrutinize to see. No, I'm using this term.
Makes sense.
Other questions? Yes.
You mentioned that those top 20 words represented something like 2% of all passwords. From which data sets are these statistics used. I believe that not all companies are just sending somewhere all the passwords available.
Yeah. So the question was around the 25, the top 25 password make up 2% of all passwords. That is kind of across the web, and clearly some systems are more secure than others. But I saw that. So specifically that one was from Splash Data. They ran a study. They do one every year about the top passwords in 2014. This one. And it's across system. So clearly, you can't use the word QWERTY if you required an 8-letter password that has an uppercase letter and an item. In that case, it would be QWERTY123 with an exclamation mark, and that's probably going to be a popular one. So statistically, it's very easy to send many requests. So maybe it's not a 1 in 50 chance of success on a password, whatever, multiplied by 25, but users would use the simplest password possible within the constraint of their policy to make their lives easier.
And you can extrapolate that many users will be reusing the same password across other systems and same username. So it may be that your system's secure, but another system isn't.
Yeah. And you don't need to guess because passwords leak all the time because all sorts of breaches happen and attackers post those passwords out there. And if you look up your own password, it's probably going to be there in one of the systems. So we have this rich data set with which you can use to identify frequent passwords that meet certain policies. And attackers use those very well. They're commercialized. You can buy them for like a couple of bucks. You can do a lot of those.
You should know that every time we talk, I have to be in the fetal position in my room for a little while.
Yeah, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you, right?
Yeah.
Other questions?
Yep. Silence.
Good. So we'll be around, and I guess we have office hours actually after lunch.
So during lunch.
During lunch. Okay.
During lunch. Yeah. So we're
eating.
lunch, office hours.